The New York Rangers extend Will Borgen for 5 years at $4.1 million per season. Good move or bad move?
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1233 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Schick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is almost here, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. And we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So some breaking news in Rangerland here. They actually made a small trade the other day that involved Ryder Korzak going to Tampa Bay. But the bigger news that's come out regarding the Rangers is obviously this extension for Will Borgen. Once again, 5 years, $4.1 million per season. I didn't really plan on doing an episode late here on Saturday night, but such is the life of NHL media, I suppose. You know, you never know when these extensions can happen. And it's not news that's entirely surprising. You know, obviously the Rangers trade Kaapo Kakko to get Will Borgen in here. He's a UFA at the end of the season, and he's played well, and I think he's somebody that the Rangers certainly want to keep in the fold. I mean, they probably want to keep him in the fold anyway, and then the fact that he's mostly played good, solid, steady, consistent hockey for this team, that just kind of ups the ante, and I think maybe in some ways even increases the pressure on the Rangers to get a contract extension done before the trade deadline rolls around. Because the biggest thing with Will Borgen, I think, is that you don't want to lose him for nothing at the end of the season. You either want to get him extended before the deadline, or if the Rangers had continued to play poor hockey, you could always trade him before the deadline to, you know, a contending team. But obviously the Rangers have righted the ship here, so Borgen will be part of those efforts going forward for the rest of this season, and then 5 more seasons on top of that. And, you know, I think more than anything else, what Will Borgen gives you, and we've talked about this on this podcast, and certainly others have talked about this as well, but it's just a feeling of stability. There's a certain consistency and simpleness to his game that I think Ranger fans have kind of taken to. You know, a few episodes back, we talked about that very subject, the fact that Ranger fans seem to be warming up pretty quickly to Will Borgen overall, and this despite the fact that a lot of us, myself included, and I'm sure a good number of you listen to this as well, were not entirely happy about Kaapo Kakko first being scapegoated as a healthy scratch when he was very clearly playing better than a lot of other high-profile Rangers. We don't need to name names. I mean, that was so long ago, and clearly the Rangers have played better since then. But you guys, I'm sure, can figure out some of the players that I'm talking about. Certainly, we discussed that at the time. But, yeah, I mean, a lot of us weren't really happy about that move, Kaapo Kakko being traded away. And obviously, Kakko's done very well for Seattle. But despite all of our feelings about that, a lot of us not being happy about the deal in general, again, I think Ranger fans have kind of taken to Borgen just because of the simplicity to his game. He plays a physical style. He seems to be able to keep guys from getting to the front of the net. And if they do get there, he's not shy about clearing them out of there. He's a decent puck-moving defenseman as well. You know, he seems to be able to get the puck out of the Ranger defensive zone, and we know what a problem that's been for the Rangers over the last bunch of seasons here. So, you know, I think above all else, that's why Ranger fans mostly like Borgen. And I know there's going to be some people that don't like this this re-signing here or extension, whatever you want to call it. Or maybe they like it in theory, but they feel like you know, the contract is a little too long, the price per year is a little bit too high, and certainly going to address some of those concerns a little bit later in today's episode. But again, the biggest reason why I think a lot of us are happy about this is because we all saw some of the worst defensemen play from the Rangers this season that we've seen certainly in recent memory, certainly the last, 4 or 5 seasons, however far you want to go back here. And guys just struggling. Now, granted, it wasn't just the defense, and it was the entire team, top to bottom, left to right, front to back. The Rangers were terrible for about 2 months there, but the Ranger defensemen, they really came under fire, whether it was Trouba or Miller or Lindgren. Even Fox was hearing it from some fans for a while there, and I think in all of those cases, it was not unwarranted. Some people certainly go a little bit overboard. And when it gets to like personal attacks, I would never condone that. But a lot of the critiques that I was seeing of all those defensemen I just named were entirely valid and, to me, entirely reasonable. Now, all those players, I think Miller and Lindgren especially, have really kind of turned things around recently. They've been playing a heck of a lot better. So that's obviously nice to see. But Borgen comes in here to the Rangers. Again, it's not a popular trade in the first place among the majority of Ranger fans. I'm sure certain Ranger fans probably liked it and were okay with moving on from Kakko to bring in, a physical defenseman. But a lot of people didn't like it. And on top of that, he walked into what I can charitably call a bleep storm, did Will Borgen. Because again, when that trade happened, that was when this team was a complete mess. The Trouba trade had already happened not too long before that. And they were still dealing with the fallout of that. People are still upset about the way Barclay Goodrow was treated during the offseason, all that stuff. And it just kept building and building. And, then Kakko gets traded and Borgen has to walk in here and try to figure it out on the fly and try to be part of the solution and not be one of the reasons why the Rangers season, at least at the time, was spiraling down the drain. And again, he came in and played mostly pretty well. There's always a little bit of an acclimation period, a learning curve, call it whatever you want to call it. But I think overall, he mostly hit the ground running. He's had a shaky game or two here and there. The game against Montreal, I thought he really had a rough time in that one. But for the most part, again, just steady, consistent hockey, very physical, does a lot of little things right. And I think, again, that when you see how poorly the Rangers have played in just about every aspect of hockey, especially the defenseman, you get a defenseman in here like that, that just plays a simple game, does the little things right, and that player just becomes that much more appealing, I think, to the fan base. And again, it seems like most Ranger fans are happy about this. There are some dissenters, and we will certainly, talk about some of the concerns that they may have in a minute here. But, the Rangers like how he's played too. He's been getting a good amount of ice time. He right now, in the 17 games that he's played for the Rangers, has averaged 18 minutes, 35 seconds of ice time per night. And again, a relatively small sample size. I wouldn't call it microscopic. The games are starting to build up for Borgen. But that number, 18:35 per night, he's never had a time on the ice that high for an entire season as he does with the 17 games here with the Rangers. And frankly, he's earned it. Now, on one hand, somebody needs to play in the top four, right? Trouba's no longer here. Lindgren is back with Fox, and they seem to be kind of connected at the hip again. You could always have Braden Schneider play up in the top four. I mean, Schneider is a top four defenseman playing on the third pairing. That's how I've looked at him for a long time. That would require him, presumably, to switch sides. Somebody would have to switch sides. But, Borgen has come in and just slotted in there very nicely with K'Andre Miller, which leads me to my next point that I want to make about this and why, again, I'm in favor of this deal here. Just the fact that it feels like it's working out pretty well for K'Andre Miller. Now, Miller in and of himself has just played better. I mean, I think we all need to acknowledge that. Again, he was one of the players among many Rangers that were under fire earlier this season. So he's obviously stepped up his game a little bit. Peter Laviolette was very, very complimentary of Miller. I believe it was after the last game that the Rangers won. But it does feel like those two have kind of gelled and they seem to be bringing out the best in each other. And, could that be a Ranger pairing down the road? Could that continue past this season? Does K'Andre Miller end up coming back with the Rangers? We're going to elaborate on that a little bit later in the episode as well, because I still think Miller has sort of an uncertain future and kind of a fascinating situation with Miller as far as how this could end up playing out. Igor Shesterkin too, and we're going to elaborate on that a little bit later in today's episode, but he spoke very highly of Will Borgen not too long ago. And I just like the fact that, you see something like this. Will Borgen comes over, plays 17 games, and then, that's pretty quick to sign an extension with your new team. And maybe the fact that they're winning helps. And, maybe he's gotten a little taste of, living in New York City and being a professional athlete in New York City. And he likes it. He likes the fans, his teammates, the coaching staff, whatever it might be, that the history of the Rangers. It could be any of those things. It could be all those things. It could be other things that we're not even thinking about. But I just think that when you see something like this, it kind of reinforces this idea that people still want to play for the Rangers. And this is an organization that has known a lot of chaos over the last bunch of seasons. I mean, you guys know how it is. I don't have to tell you there's been, basically a decade's worth of drama in this season alone here. But, people still want to come here. And the proof is in the pudding, because look at the JT Miller situation on top of that. There's a rumor that, of course, he only wants to come to the Rangers, and he'll only waive his no-move clause to do so. So we're lucky in that regard that players still want to be here. And obviously, Will Borgen, he could have headed into free agency, but he must have gotten an offer to his liking, enough so to forego being a UFA, where he can talk to a whole bunch of other teams, and he signs the dotted line, and he's under contract for this team for the next 5 seasons after this one. So good stuff all around. In just a minute, though, I do want to acknowledge some of the concerns that Ranger fans have. Some of the reservations that you might have, the length of the contract, the amount of dollars of the contract. I'm going to acknowledge all of them, but I'm also going to talk a little bit about why, again, I still feel like this is mostly a good deal for the Rangers. If I want to really oversimplify this and just put a letter grade on it, I'd go B+ for this deal for the Rangers. I think overall it's a very solid move, and one that doesn't have a whole lot of risk. But getting ahead of myself, going to elaborate on that in just a second. And we'll get to that in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. 1 game, 2 teams, endless possibilities, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's the icing on the cake. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here. On Locked On New York Rangers, big shout out to the Everydayers. As always, in our next episode, Rangers are going to be hosting the Colorado Avalanche in about, let's see, what would that be? About 14 hours from now. It's pretty late on Saturday night here, so we're going to get this episode up as soon as possible for you guys. But yeah, they play the Avalanche. Big game. The Avalanche just, hey, they don't have to deal with Mikko Rantanen, right? So that's a positive for the Rangers. That was a huge trade. We're actually going to talk about that a little bit in the next episode as well, because I do think that a blockbuster deal like that somewhat affects the JT Miller sweepstakes for the Rangers. I'll explain why in the next episode. And we also got to talk about the somewhat small trade that the Rangers made, but they're all notable, and you never know what can happen and who's going to blossom into a star eventually. But the Rangers deal Ryder Korzak to the Lightning in exchange for Lucas Edmonds. So we will talk about that in the next episode as well. But for right now, Will Borgen, I did want to acknowledge a couple of concerns that Ranger fans might have. And the first one is just kind of like an open question that I want to throw at you guys, because I think it's a question that has a lot of layers and doesn't have any concrete answer right now. And that is, where exactly are the Rangers right now? Right? They're kind of in no man's land. They're kind of in that territory where you're not really sure if they're going for it or if they're kind of retooling on the fly, or is this going to be a rebuild? I mean, I definitely don't think they're going to end up doing a full-fledged tear-down rebuild like they did when the letter went out. I don't think they have to. There's still enough, good, solid young talent in place where I don't think you have to start trading, the entire roster. But you look at what they've done recently. Are they already in a way buyers? Because yeah, they sold Kakko, but I think the Rangers did that, looking to, I mean, you always want to win the trade, but I think they felt, the Rangers, that they could win the trade in terms of, giving up Kaapo Kakko and bringing back Will Borgen. And so the question now becomes, will the Rangers keep going with that? Because they've also brought in Urho Vakanainen. They've also brought in, Will Borgen himself. That's obviously the big one that we're talking about here. And Arthur Kaliev, he was a waiver pickup not too long ago as well. So I can understand there being some uncertainty on the part of the fans who aren't really sure exactly what the direction of the Ranger franchise is right now, but I'm not too worried about it. Even if they do have to go at some point, full scorched earth, tear down rebuild, which again, I don't think is going to happen. But even if it does, I don't think Will Borgen is going to be the most difficult player in the world to move, because somebody else will be interested in him. Again, I think the price is reasonable and the length of the contract's reasonable as well. He's only 28 years old, just turned 28. So I don't think he'd be a difficult player to move if at some point you had to, either because you're rebuilding or maybe there's a situation where, he becomes a cap casualty. But I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think the Rangers are banking on that, but it's good to know they could do that, as a little bit of a safety net there. Another concern I'm seeing some people is that this could be an overpayment for Will Borgen. Again, for full reference here, 5 years at $4.1 million per season. If this is an overpayment, I feel like it's only a slight one, because you got to keep in mind here, Will Borgen, at the end of this season, if he doesn't sign this contract, he's a UFA, right? He's only a couple of months away. When does free agency start? I want to say like July. I think it's July, somewhere in July. There's somewhere in that ballpark. But that's only a handful of months. And, at that point, he can talk to any of the other 32 teams. I'm sure there's going to be teams that are interested in him. I think it's entirely possible, probably likely, that he gets a better contract if he hits the open market than the one he just got from the Rangers. And so, 5 years is a little bit high. Maybe like 4 years, I probably would have liked that a little bit better. Instead of 4.1 million, 3.5, 3.3, I don't know, somewhere in that ballpark. But again, he's got free agency looming. So if you really want to keep him in the fold, you really want him to be here, then I think a slight overpayment, which I think is what this is, but it's only a very slight one, is necessary, because otherwise, why would he do it? I mean, unless he just loves New York and loves his teammates and loves the fans and he always wanted to be a Ranger. I mean, that stuff can come into play too. But for the most part, guys are looking for the best deal that they can get for themselves. And so for Borgen to say, okay, forget about being a free agent, I'm going to stay here, I'm going to be a Ranger for the next 5 years, you're going to have to come with a pretty solid offer. If you go to like 3 years, because I saw some people suggesting that too, that's not as nice of a contract for Borgen. And something else to consider here is that the more years you give somebody, typically the less you have to pay them per season. I think Vincent Trocheck is a good example of that right now. And in the case of Will Borgen, because I saw a couple of people commenting already, they should have only gone 3 years. First of all, even with the 5 years, Borgen is only going to be 33 when the contract ends. So this is not going to be like some broken down defenseman who's going to be 39 or 40 years old. That's just not going to be the case. He's still going to be, in his early 30s there. So that's good. But also, by giving him, the 5 years, it makes it more likely that resulted in a lower cap hit per season. And that's a good thing, because we all know how tight the salary cap can be. There's exceptions to every rule, but typically the longer a contract is, the less you'll have to pay per season. And I think that probably applied here. So if you want to go just 3 years for Borgen, you probably would have had to have given him more than $4.1 million per season, or he wouldn't have signed the contract. And if you do that, I mean, that's an option. You could do that. But if you do that, it's that much more money against the salary cap for every season that Borgen is going to be here. And with that being the case, it kind of handcuffs you as far as other things you can do, re-signing your own guys, signing free agents from around the league, trading for guys you want to bring in. It's just that much bigger of a slice of the pie. It's for less time, but it's for more money for the years of these years. So hopefully that explains it. And again, I'm not too worried about the length of the deal. 4 years might have been ideal for me, but 5 years, taking him to age 33, I'm not too worried about that either. Something else that I've seen suggested, and it's a topic that we discussed on this podcast not too long ago, as far as, concerns about the Will Borgen extension. The question of whether Chris Drury would overpay Will Borgen as a way to sort of save face in the Kaapo Kakko trade, because as we've talked about on here, Kaapo Kakko is off to a really good start with the Seattle Kraken. He's been especially hot as of late, and they gave him away. They bring in Will Borgen in the 2 draft picks. But does that then result in Drury saying, okay, well, I got to justify this trade, so let me just throw some money and throw some years at Will Borgen? And is that what happened here? Maybe to an extent, but again, I look at this contract and I don't think it's any kind of a gross overpayment or anything like that, either in terms of the length or the dollars per season. So it's not something that I'm worried about too much. Now, again, did that factor in a little bit? The fact that Kakko is doing so well and Drury needs to, justify the move maybe to the fans, but even more so to his bosses, entirely possible there. But, the saving grace of everything that's happening with Kakko is at least Will Borgen has played well here. And again, I think they have a solid defenseman now locked up for the next half decade after the season is complete. And another idea that I've seen out there, as far as the social media chatter, could Borgen's game age poorly? None of us have a crystal ball. None of us know for sure. And to kind of compare him to another current Ranger in Ryan Lindgren, I think with Lindgren, there's pretty like solid proof right now that his game is going to age poorly and probably already is. Now, again, the last bunch of games here, I think Lindgren's played better. All the defensemen have played better. But he's taken a beating over the years. He's had a lot of injuries. And it feels like it's starting to take a toll on Ryan Lindgren. Now, Borgen goes out there and he plays a physical style too, and he throws his weight around and takes the body, blocks shots, all that good stuff. But it's worth noting that Borgen really doesn't miss time due to injury. As far as I could tell, doing a search of this and looking up his injury history, the only time where he missed a significant amount of time in the NHL was back in 2021. And that was when he broke his right forearm while going down to block a shot. So he missed some time there. But you look at what he's done recently. 2 years ago, he played all 82 games with the Kraken. Last year, he also played all 82 games with the Kraken. And you look at this season, and he hasn't been injured here either with the Kraken or with the Rangers. So he's a very durable player and somebody that, I'm hopeful that even though he is a physical player, he should hold up fairly well over the course of this contract. There was another injury. I didn't realize this about him, but there was a really scary injury that he had back when he was like 17 or 18, I believe it was. This was, one of those fluky things. Like, you can't hear this and think that, oh, he's injury prone, but it was a situation where the skate of one of his opponents got him in the neck and it missed his carotid. I don't know how to pronounce this. Carotid, CAROTID artery by apparently a couple of millimeters. And he got up and didn't even think anything of it. Didn't think it was really that bad. And then obviously needed treatment very quickly. But that's obviously a scary situation. And we're glad he's okay. But I don't count that as far as oh, he's injury prone. I mean, that's a just fluky and, scary situation there. But obviously glad that it wasn't as bad as it could have been. So as far as injuries and his game aging poorly, I don't really see that either. There's not a lot of evidence to support that. You never know what can happen. He's going to get older, just like we all do through the next 5 years here. But, so far so good. He's been a very durable workhorse type player for Seattle. And hopefully that continues to be the case now as he goes forward with the Rangers. So in just a second, going to go ahead and keep everything rolling. I want to shift our attention to the biggest winners and losers of this Will Borgen extension. And we will do that in just a second. All right, so winners and losers here. This is kind of a unique one, and we've done this segment before, like whenever there's a trade or a contract extension or whatever it might be. I don't think I've ever done this though. There's going to be a player here that I'm going to put both as a loser and as a winner of this deal because it could really go either way. And that player, it's somebody that I talked about a little bit earlier in this episode. That would be K'Andre Miller. We'll start with the bad stuff and we'll end with the good stuff with Miller. I think that's usually the best way to do things like this. As far as why he might end up a loser from this deal, when you just look at this on the surface, the optics aren't great for K'Andre Miller here because, he at the end of the season is an RFA with arbitration, right? So he's in the last year of his current contract too. And the Rangers, before doing any kind of a deal with Miller, or at least agreeing to a deal with Miller, they might be talking. We don't know what goes on behind the scenes, but before obviously finalizing a deal with Miller, they decided to extend the 28-year-old who is here from Seattle and has played a grand total of 17 games as a member of the New York Rangers. That guy got a contract before K'Andre Miller, who has been here for now half a decade. He has had some good seasons, some solid stretches of play. He's been an important part of this team. He's been part of a couple of deep playoff runs for this team as well. And he didn't get the contract extension before, again, the guy that basically, at least relatively speaking, just got here. Now, there's other factors at play here, too. Maybe the fact that Borgen is a UFA, Miller's an RFA with arbitration rights, that tells the Rangers that it's more urgent to get a deal done with Borgen than it is with Miller. It's also possible that, Miller and the Rangers, they might be talking, but maybe they're just not there in terms of what's fair for the next deal that they agree on. But I think it's also possible here. And I realize Borgen and Miller play different sides, but, the Rangers are shoring themselves up here with Will Borgen in the event that they decide to trade K'Andre Miller when the season ends, which is a possible outcome. But it's also possible that they really like this pairing because I think the two of them have played well together, and it's possible that Miller does get his deal. And that leads me right into why I think Miller could end up being a winner from this whole thing. If he does stick around past this season, you figure there's a pretty good chance that he gets to keep playing with Will Borgen. And again, it's give and take. I have no doubt that the two of them are helping each other out a little bit. Like I said, that duo seems to have meshed pretty well over the last bunch of games here, and they seem to be clicking. But on top of that, another reason why Miller could be a winner from this whole thing, on one hand, he loses some leverage because the Rangers just got another defenseman in place for the foreseeable future. By that same token, though, he could be a winner because now, him and his agent can look at the deal that Will Borgen just signed, and they can say, okay, you just gave this guy that just got here a minute ago $4.1 million over 5 years. That's our floor. Like, we're not going to go below that. We're going to go higher than that. And it's possible that, if there's a situation where it ends up going to arbitration, and teams usually try to avoid that. But I think this Borgen deal gives Miller a little bit more leverage in those kind of talks. And if the Rangers do agree to a long-term deal with Miller, there's a decent chance it might come in a little bit higher than Will Borgen's current number. We'll see. Again, it'll depend on the length of the contract and all that stuff. Will there be any kind of no move clauses thrown into the K'Andre Miller contract if he gets one from the Rangers? These are all questions that will eventually be answered. But one way or another, I do think, like I said earlier, it's going to be very interesting to see how things play out with K'Andre Miller because he's been up and down here. I feel like he has regressed in recent seasons, but by that same token, he's playing very well again the last handful of games, especially compared to where he was earlier this season. As far as another loser from this whole thing, I feel bad saying this because I feel like I always put him in this category, but I'm going to say it's Ryan Lindgren. Every move that the Rangers make, I feel like just brings Ryan Lindgren just that much closer to being an ex-Ranger. And he might be willing and happy to go somewhere else, but he's played his whole career here. I know the Bruins drafted him, but he's played his whole NHL career with the Rangers. He never played in the NHL with the Bruins. So this kind of just pushes him that much farther out the door. I mean, I just don't see any realistic scenario where the Rangers bring him back. And whatever chance there was, it probably is that much less now because, again, they just shored themselves up. They've got Borgen in place going forward. Another winner from this deal, I'm going to say Igor Shesterkin. We touched on this very briefly a little bit earlier in today's show, but there was a win that the Rangers had. It might have been after the last game. It was definitely very recently. Igor spoke very, very highly of Will Borgen. And there have been a couple plays where, Borgen has gotten some congratulations from Igor on the ice. There was one in particular where, forget who they were playing, but there was going to be a really good grade A scoring chance from in deep, and Borgen got there quickly, got his stick on the shot, deflected the puck up and out of play, and Igor was kind of scrambling to get back into the net. It was going to be a very difficult save for Igor to make, and Borgen disrupted it, and right after it happened, he got the stick pat from Igor Shesterkin. Igor recognized what happened there. Igor seems to be a fan. We had this quote after, again, I think this was the last game, so what Igor had to say about Borgen. I love the way he plays in front of me. He is a huge player for us. He plays really well, smart. He's a strong guy. We have a pretty good connection, but I hate it when I play against him. I don't really get that last stat. Like, did Borgen score on Igor? Maybe I should have looked that up before I hit record here, but I think that's also just Igor being Igor. He's good for a quirky quote every once in a while for sure. But again, he seems to be, this is your franchise goalie. We all know about the big contract extension that Igor signed. He's going to be here for a long time. He seems to be a big fan of Will Borgen and what he brings to the table. And now he's going to have this guy in place, like I said, for the next 5 years, assuming, nothing, there's not a trade or anything of the like. A loser from this thing, I'm going to say Chris Kreider. And this one might seem a little bit strange on the surface, but stick with me just for a second. So Kreider, his name came up earlier this season when the memo went out. The Rangers want to shake up their core. They're looking to deal one of their big name players. And the two names at the top of the list were Trouba and Kreider. We know what happened with Trouba. He's long gone. He's with the Ducks now. And all the best to him, over there in Anaheim. But Kreider's name was on that list too. He's still here. But, every contract that gets signed is just that much more of a piece of the pie. And we know the salary cap is tight. You can only keep so many players. And I just feel like Kreider, I don't think they would deal him in season because it'd be hard to get equal or better value back for him. And also, I don't think they want to completely disrupt the locker room again. We saw how that went the last time, with Trouba, and then with Kakko even too. You don't want to go through that again. So I think Kreider will finish the season with the Rangers, but he's got 2 more years left on his contract after that. And he's at $6.5 million per season. And I could see him maybe being, even partially as a result of being a cap casualty, traded in the offseason. I think that really could happen. I'm not convinced that Kreider is on the opening night roster next season. I'm also not convinced that he won't be. But every deal like this, again, it just takes up that much bigger of a percentage of the salary cap. And it goes back to that theme that we always talk about on here. You can't keep everybody. And you do wonder if, Kreider could be on the move partially as a result of this. That wouldn't be like the reason, but it would be a reason, in theory. One more winner here. This is kind of a fun one. It is, and there's probably some of you listening to this right now, fans who don't like no move clauses, because Borgen has some trade protection, but not the kind that we've seen the Rangers give out to certain other players. The way his deal goes, and this is per Puckpedia, so I'm trusting what they put on there. This is how it's going to work, the 5 years with Will Borgen. For the first year of the deal, he has a full no trade clause. So he can't be traded if he doesn't want to be in the first year. That's just the first year, though. I don't think any of us are too worried about the first year. He'll be 28 at the start of the year, 29 at the end. He'll be fine. So that's fine. Second year, he can block a trade to 15 teams. Third year, he can block a trade to 10 teams. Fourth year, he can block a trade to 6 teams. Fifth year, he can't block a trade to anybody. So it does get better as it goes. And really, the only ones that really handcuff you, to me at least, are the full no move clauses, where you can't trade somebody anywhere, you can't waive somebody. Those are the ones that really give you problems. Even the ones that are 15 teams, you've still got half the league you can work with. You can usually get something done there. So I do like the fact, again, that every year that goes by, there's less and less no trade protection for Borgen. The first year, he's got the full no trade, but I don't think that matters that much because they're not going to look to trade him in the first year of the deal anyway. So, yeah, that's kind of where things stand. One more thing that I wanted to just mention here before we call it. The Hartford Wolfpack got into an all-out brawl earlier tonight, Saturday night here. We almost had a goalie fight. So everything was happening away from, it was in the offensive zone for Hartford. And we had Dylan Garand. Then there's video of this online right now. If you go on Twitter and whatnot, or any social media site, Garand comes flying up the ice, and he's trying to fight the opposing goalie, Felix Sandstrom, and basically went up and just shoved him in the chest. He was challenging him. They both took their helmets off. They were ready to go. And then a ref stepped between them. So we were that close to a goalie fight. I was just talking about this with Igor Shesterkin the other night. And lo and behold, it's almost Dylan Garand that gets into the fight there. And for what it's worth, apparently it was also Matt Rempe bobblehead night in Hartford with the Wolfpack. He's not even there anymore, but obviously they scheduled these promotions well in advance. And they were going to, I'm sure they did give them out, but it's just kind of funny that happens on Matt Rempe bobblehead night of all things. But yeah, figure we can call it there. If you guys would like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, @jchick17. Once again, @jchik17. Thank you guys as always for tuning in, and I will see you next time.